Hello, ladies! Here is part 2 of everything you need to know to understand St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. To start it off, let's talk about the first half of the French Wars of Religion. It all began in a town in northeastern France called Vassy. Francis, the Duke of Guise, was a powerful Catholic nobleman traveling through the town. He came across a rather large group of Huguenots that were holding a religious service inside of the barn, which was very illegal at the time as Protestant worship was not tolerated by the French government. A violent altercation broke out between the Duke's men and the Huguenots. Over 50 Huguenots were killed and over 100 people were wounded. What exactly happened is still under debate. Some people say the Huguenots were singing songs obnoxiously loudly and didn't stop when the Duke's group arrived. Others say that the Duke purposely provoked the group into conflicts because of his deep hatred for Protestants. The massacre at Vassy was the spark that began the French Wars of Religion. After this, Protestant and Catholic forces both quickly scrambled to mobilize their armies. Small altercations turned into full-blown civil wars. As conflict escalated, both sides were driven to more and more extreme ideology. Protestants viewed the conflict as proof they were being discriminated against and hunted down. Catholics viewed the conflict as fighting and defending the true faith. The French Wars of Religion spanned from 1562 to 1598, consisting of 8 civil wars that were separated by short moments of relative calmness. The first war ended with the Edict of Amboise. The edict gave the Huguenots very limited religious freedom and only in a few towns. On top of that, nobody trusted the edict and tensions did not go down. The second and third war were both brief but very violent. Huguenots attempted to seize the king in 1567, but they did not succeed. The wars were brought to an end with the Peace of Saint Germain in 1517. Okay, I'm gonna butcher this guy's name. Gaspard de Coligny was a French army admiral who was also an outspoken Huguenot leader, and he began to gain greater influence over the young King Charles IV. The Huguenots were hopeful, but the Catholics were bitter. The Peace of Saint Germain may have brushed things under the rug, but tensions were worse than ever beneath the surface. Coligny, okay, I don't know how to say this guy's name. Coligny grew very close to the young king, and the admiral tried to convince Charles IV to go to war against Spain, who was very Catholic. Devout French Catholics such as the House of Guise and the mother of Charles IV, Catherine de' Medici, began to panic. Fear among the Catholic French government that a total Protestant takeover might be in the imminent future. Let's talk about the House of Bourbon and the House of Guise. The House of Bourbon was the leading Protestant family located in the south and west of France. They were high-ranking nobles that were related by blood to the royal family. Their leader was Antoine de Bourbon, the King of Navarre, which was a small kingdom between France and Spain. His son Henry became king after him. Henry's goal was first to protect Protestant rights, but also to inch closer to the throne. The House of Guise was a very rich and powerful Catholic family. Their goal was to completely obliterate Protestantism from the face of existence and to dominate the French crown through loyalty to Catholicism. They were heavily supported by Spain and the papacy. The two houses grew to be very powerful because the central government in France was rather weak. This was because of their teenage King Charles IV and their later heavily ill King Henry III. Let's talk about Catherine de' Medici. She was a powerful Italian noblewoman from the Medici family who became Queen of France through her marriage to King Henry II. After her husband passed away, she played a large political role as Queen Regent and advisor to her sons. Today, we remember her for her very deep involvement in the French Wars of Religion. Let's take a look at her first 2 sons. Francis II became king at just 15 after his father died in a jousting accident. Francis was riddled with physical illness, and his reign barely even lasted a year. His marriage to Mary, Queen of Scots, complicated things even more politically. Mary's mother was from the House of Guise. During Francis's reign, it was really the Guise family that held the power through influence of Mary, something that Catherine greatly resented. After Francis passed away, Catherine took on a much larger role of managing the kingdom. Her second son, Charles IV, became king at just 10 years old, so Catherine served as queen regent and basically ruled France for much of Charles' early reign. Charles was known to be emotionally unstable, as he had frequent bursts of rage and paranoia. During his reign, Catherine worked night and day to keep the peace between the Catholics and the Huguenots, but she was not very successful. But you can't blame her, as it was a bit of an impossible job. Catherine spent her life trying to keep her family dynasty on the throne during one of the most destructive periods in French history. Despite her efforts, all three of her sons died without heirs, and her family dynasty ended with the death of her youngest, Henry III. In history, she's often painted as a cold, manipulative, and ruthless figure, but a person could argue that she was just trying her best to hold together a crumbling kingdom. Let's talk about an infamous wedding. The marriage of Margaret of Valois and Henry of Navarre was one of the most disastrous weddings in human history. Catherine de' Medici was the one who had the idea to arrange a marriage between her daughter, Margaret of Valois, I don't know how to say it. Anyways, her daughter, a Catholic, to Henry of Navarre, the leading Protestant prince. Her goal was to unite the royal family with Protestant leaders and hopefully stabilize the country. But in reality, not a single person was happy with this wedding. Catholics were unhappy because they viewed the wedding as rewarding heresy. Protestants were suspicious that Catherine was planning to double-cross them. There was no trust anywhere. Margaret herself adamantly stated that she did not want to marry Henry, as the two of them barely knew each other. There were also rumors that she was in love with the Duke of Guise. Massive amounts of Huguenot nobles traveled to Paris for the wedding. This was not great because Paris was an extremely Catholic city. The tension was so thick that the knights having trouble cutting through it. The marriage was supposed to be a grand gesture of reconciliation, but instead, it triggered what we came here to talk about, one of the bloodiest events in French history. Margaret and Henry had an incredibly unhappy marriage, and after Henry escaped the French court in 1576, they lived the rest of their lives apart. Let's talk about the assassination attempt on Admiral Coligny. The admiral had great amounts of power and respect of the people. He was very close to Charles IV in the months leading up to the massacre. It was a little too close for comfort for Catherine de' Medici. A few days after the royal wedding between Margaret and Henry, Coligny was walking back to his residence after a meeting with the king. A gunman fired 2 shots at him from afar. One took off a part of his finger, and the other hit him in the arm. He was pretty severely wounded, but Coligny survived the attack. After word broke out of what happened, there was a strong suspicion that Catherine either knew about it or allowed it to happen. That's if she wasn't the one who planned it herself. People hypothesized that it was because Coligny was gaining too much influence over her son, and in turn too much power over France. The Huguenot leaders suspected the origins of the assassination plan came from the highest levels of court. Charles IV was genuinely shaken because he greatly admired Coligny. He promised the Huguenot leaders justice, but Catherine was terrified that the Protestants would retaliate. Within 2 days after the attempt, Catherine and the council decided that they needed Coligny to die for real this time, and all the Huguenot nobles. The timing was perfect for them because most of them were still gathered in Paris for the wedding. Catherine feared that the Huguenots might attempt a coup or attempt to have the royal family assassinated. Catherine called a secret council meeting with her son and his top advisors. This was the plan they pitched to Charles. If we kill the Huguenot leaders before they kill us, we won't be the ones doing the dying. It was meant to be a sophisticated killing of the top Protestant nobles. Charles was reluctant, but his mother harshly hammered into him that if he didn't agree to killing them, they would kill him. What do you think you would have done in this position? Charles eventually caved and gave the green light, not just for a targeted assassination, but for a massacre. And to be honest, I would have done the same thing, because talking back to your mom's scary, especially if she was your mom. It was quite a journey that we went on today, but we finally got here in the end. Let's talk about St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. In the early hours of August 24th, 1572, royal guards forced entry into Coligny's residence. Coligny was in bed, wounded and heavily bandaged from his assassination attempt a few days ago. The assassins stabbed him repeatedly while he was laying in bed. After the initial stabbing, his throat was slit and his face and hands were butchered beyond recognition. They picked up his mangled body and threw it out of the window of his second-story room into the courtyard below. A mob quickly gathered and they castrated and disemboweled his corpse and dragged it through the streets. Some accounts even say they set his corpse on fire while dragging it through the public. The next targets were the Huguenot leaders staying in the city for the wedding. Royal soldiers and mobs went into their homes, dragged them out, and killed them in the streets. The royal palace was sealed off, and soldiers began to move throughout the city. Insignificant Protestants that had no political standing also were dragged out of their homes and killed in public squares. Eventually, Catholic citizens began to gather in large groups and join into the party. Entire families were murdered, many of them stabbed in their homes, and allegedly some of them even burned alive. Remember the Duke of Guise? He was out there leading mobs throughout the city. Eventually, it grew beyond the control of the royal authorities. Catherine was supposedly satisfied with how the events unfolded, even as the massacre continued. The killing groups eventually moved to nearby Protestant territories, and everyone was a target. Eventually, the massacre reached beyond Paris and spread to surrounding provinces. More and more Catholic commoners began to join into the killing. Masses of angry everyday citizens, consisting of humans like you and I, hunted down their Protestant neighbors in the streets, dragging them out of their homes, often torturing them before murdering them in cold blood. In the countryside, entire communities were completely wiped out as Huguenots were slaughtered by the hundreds. After their bodies were mutilated, their corpses were defiled and often publicly displayed as warnings. The women and children were not spared. This all happened on the same day so far. When night came, the killings didn't stop, and by the morning of August 25th, the worst of the massacre had passed, but it continued in some provinces for several more days. The death toll is highly debated, and estimates range anywhere from 5,000 to 30,000 deaths. The massacre was a critical blow to the Protestant Reformation, significantly weakening their leadership. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre started out as targeted killings, but quickly mutated into an indiscriminate slaughterfest. The massacre was a watershed moment in European history, and its consequences reached far past 16th century France. Religious conflict in France deepened, and the divide between Protestants and Catholics solidified. The massacre led to a radicalization of ideas within the Protestant movement as individuals across the continent saw the killings as evidence of cruelty within the Catholic Church. Protestant countries such as England, the Dutch Republic, and Germany were outraged at the whole debacle. Relationships between Catholic and Protestant countries were further strained. The massacre amplified animosity between Catholic Spain and Protestant England. The massacre, along with the Spanish Inquisitions, fueled widespread distrust between Catholic and Protestant territories. Despite the massacre, the Huguenots were indeed not obliterated from the face of the earth, and the massacre actually solidified a Huguenot identity. The Huguenots scattered but eventually regrouped and kept fighting in the French Wars of Religion for another 25 years. After the death of Catherine's last son, Henry of Navarre was next in line for the French throne, and Henry, more than anyone, recognized the need for religious tolerance. This led to the Edict of Nantes in 1698, which officially granted limited freedom to the Protestants in France. Nonetheless, still a very significant step towards religious coexistence. St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre was one of the most devastating events in European history, and its consequences were felt in every corner of the continent for centuries that came afterwards. The information in this video was almost entirely sourced from Wikipedia articles, so take it with a grain of salt. Congratulations! You made it to the end. Thank you for watching part 2 of everything you need to know to understand St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Goodbye!